Let's go to Syria and meet the press moment for the new de facto leader as Ahmed al-Sharaa, who was giving a press conference, and one with a notable impact on the immediate future of the country. He announced, firstly, that all weapons in the country will come under state control, he said, not on the streets, and also with not being in the hands, he said, of other armies, other factions which will need to be dissolved and enter into one Syrian army. They would include, he said, he was specific, the US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, that's something clearly that will be a challenge early on, because the group has said until it has some representation in government, that is for talks to come. And we're also worth pointing out, they have something like 10,000 ISIS prisoners in the northeast of Syria. He also talks about a new defence ministry being announced in the coming days. Let's hear a little of what he had to say.
A committee of senior military officials will be formed to draw up a new structure for the new Syrian army. Then the factions will begin to announce their dissolution. We will never allow weapons outside the authority of the state, whether they be from revolutionary factions or factions present in the Syrian Democratic Forces zone.
Ahmed al-Sharaa, formerly Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, giving up his nom de guerre, and that now his transitional name, his real name. He was giving the press conference notably alongside the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan, Fidan, whose government has pledged to help in the transition. Let's go to Ankara. Let's speak to our correspondent there, Jasper Mortimer. Jasper, good to speak to you. First of all, let's talk about what we've just heard, that press conference, that announcement with pretty jaw-dropping news, and the context as you see it.
Yes, certainly, and Turkey will be delighted to hear this, because what Ahmed al-Sharaa is basically saying is that the SDF must lay down its weapons and become absorbed in a new Syrian army and put an end to its being an independent force in Syria. The big question is, will the SDF agree to do this? The SDF at the moment controls about 1/3 of Syria. It has the support of Kurds, who are 10% of the Syrian population. In the third of Syria that the SDF controls are most of the oil and natural gas deposits, the principal natural resource of Syria. And the SDF also holds thousands of Islamic State prisoners. The SDF has a considerable bargaining power. However, Ahmed al-Sharaa has proved in the past 10 days that he chooses his words carefully. He's a practical man. He's not known for exaggeration and bombastic talk. So maybe he has already struck a deal with the SDF that we don't know about.
Now, we heard earlier this week on Friday, I think it was, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey's leader, talking about how they would help with the transition. Of course he might. Very altruistic, some might say, but of course there's always something to be had for the other side. Talk us through how Turkey sits with this and how useful this moment is right now for Turkey.
Yes, well, certainly Turkey has a considerable leverage. When the HDS, Ahmed al-Sharaa's group, was running Idlib, a northwestern enclave for the Syrian opposition, until Assad was overthrown, it got all its supplies, food, ammunition, whatever, from Turkey. And looking to the future, Turkey is the principal economic power that can help Syria rebuild itself. One can imagine a lot of investment, construction companies, equipment and everything will flow from Turkey into Syria as it rebuilds itself. However, Turkey does want something. And what it wants is a buffer zone right along the Turkish-Syrian border, about 30 kilometers deep. And within that buffer zone, there would be no Kurdish forces whatsoever. In other words, it wants to insulate itself against a revival of Turkish-Kurdish insurgency from northern Syria. Now, it has already set up a buffer zone in places along the Turkish-Syrian border, but there are gaps in it. And one of the gaps is in the central northern part of that of Syria, around the town of Kobani, which is the Syrian Kurdish town that the SDF leader comes from. What the Kurds want, however, is an autonomous zone focused on northeastern Syria, around the towns of Hasakia and Kamishli. And it wants that autonomy to be recognized by the new government in Damascus in the same way that the autonomous zone of Iraq is recognized as an area where the Kurds can do their own thing.
Let me get your take on this, because this is an area that you've covered this region over the years, and you know this region very well, certainly Syria's northeast as well. So these are some of the statements that we've heard in the press conference from Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister. He said, first of all, Syria was alone, and alone in itself responsible, the rebel groups, for overthrowing Bashar al-Assad. This is a Syrian victory, he said. He then moved on to talk about sanctions, he said, must immediately be lifted as soon as possible for Damascus. Then he goes on to say this, which is very interesting, saying that Donald Trump, as president-elect in the US, knows better, he said, than to back Kurdish fighters in Syria. The exact quote is this. He said, when we look at America's interest, it is a mathematical calculation whether Turkey or a terrorist organisation like the PKK, he said, is more important. Quote, Mr. Trump sees the maths immediately. What do you make of that? And just talk us through what that means for the impact in the days and months ahead of that very tender part of Syria.
Well, I think America knows what's in its interests better than Hakan Fidan does, with all due respect to my foreign minister. Look, the problem here is that America has been arming and training the SDF and using it as its proxy force to suppress the Islamic State group, pockets of which still exist in Syria, and thousands of prisoners of which are holed up in SDF jails. So America certainly supports the SDF because of its role in containing the Islamic State group. However, Turkey well knows that there are many PKK elements, PKK, the Turkish insurgent group, in the SDF. And the head of the SDF, Mazlum Abdi, admitted this in an interview about a week ago. Mazlum Abdi, in fact, or Syrian Kurd though he is, actually took part in a PKK raid into southern Turkey in the 1990s. So Turkey is implacably opposed to the SDF. So a compromise has to be found between Turkey and America's common interest in suppressing the Islamic State and making sure that that group does not revive itself, and Turkey's own interests in, keeping down the PKK. And I think a compromise is possible if the SDF can expunge PKK elements from its forces and Syrian-orientated force rather than a Syrian Kurd-orientated force. For instance, Turkey enjoys with the Kurdish autonomous zone in Iraq. Turkey has even appointed an envoy to the Kurdish autonomous zone in Iraq. So it should be possible for Turkey to work out a relationship with the Syrian Kurds.
Jasper, good to talk to you. Cut out a little bit towards the end, but I think we got the drift of your message. Jasper Mortimer, our correspondent in Ankara.